Mr. Monzel Ford says as he was sleeping one night last week, his home surveillance camera motion detector kept going off. So from bed, he pulled out his phone and looked at the living room.
This orb, this imagery just hovering in my living room.
No one else was there. It wasn't a flashlight or passing headlights. And Pastor Ford thinks it was too big to be a dust particle. He walked into the living room, watching the live feed on his phone.
But when I went out there, I couldn't physically see what I'm looking at in the live feed. So now I'm like, whoa.
The orb came and went for hours, at one point splitting into several shapes.
That's when I'm like, nope. Something's going on here.
Pastor Ford has been haunted by some of the things he's seen as police chaplain and while working his own street ministry. But nothing has spooked him quite like this.
If it's physical, I can stand it, I can challenge it, I can approach it, I can deal with it. But when we talk about things that just floating and disappearing.
Welcome back, campers, to another episode of your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, pre-internet mysteries, and trying to raise our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. We are your camp counselors, Woody Brown
and Tyler Bentz.
Bro,
hey man,
I don't even want to waste another second. Last episode, we got interrupted, and you were trying to tell us your orb experience. So I don't think we should delay any longer. I think we should get started.
Let's do it. Okay, so this would have been, I'm so awful with dates. So this would have been years and years ago. Woody and I knew each other at the time, but this was long before we would go on to start a band, become best friends and all that. So at the time, I was still living in West Hollywood. I had come home for, I don't know, like a week or so. Maybe it was during the holidays. I can't really remember, but I came home and my stepdad had an office that was just outside of, it was like another little building beside the house that I grew up in. Now my sister Addie lives in that house. What's up, Addie? But it was like an office space / loft. So downstairs there was a 2-car garage. Upstairs there was a big sort of open loft space. Windows on both ends with your sort of typical, I guess, like farmhouse kind of look. Before that was our practice space. My mom and my stepdad split up, and so that sort of became a sort of makeshift practice space with the other band that I was in. And since I was home for the weekend, I think I pulled the bed out, my old bed out of the house, and like it was a very temporary kind of setup. I was used to living on my own, so I didn't, I was trying to do anything to get away from having to like go back to living in the house of my parents, even for a week. So I'm laying in the bed. So if I'm laying flat on the bed, if I look to my left, across the room, there's like a staircase. If I look to my right, there's about 2 feet of space, and then the bed was sort of tucked in the corner kind of deal. And there was an outlet over there, and that outlet is where I would plug in my laptop, and then I would like watch movies and fall asleep every night. And so at that time, we had those old laptops that would get like blazing hot. I mean, they still may, but I don't have a laptop anymore. So
most of those laptop batteries have since been recalled.
Yeah, I mean they would
house
get
fires started.
Yeah, crazy hot. I just need to preface by saying I had one of those, so that was a pretty standard thing. So I was still on sort of songwriter musician time, so I would stay up super late and like making music or drawing or whatever. And so anyway, so the laptop would always be on the bed. So I'm facing on my left side, I'm sleeping in the middle of the night. I don't really know this first time. I don't really know what woke me up, but I just remember my eyes opening. I wasn't startled or anything like that, but I remember my eyes, for some reason I woke up, and behind me, which would have been the wall and that outlet like I was talking about, I see the whole room is illuminated. So I immediately think in my mind, as I'm just waking up, I think, oh my God, there's a fire. The battery got too hot. The laptop got too hot. So I immediately kind of jump over to the other side of the bed, and my head kind of peeks over the edge of the bed. And when I do that, I see it's probably about the size of a softball maybe. And it's this bright orange, sort of completely self-illuminated little orb. And at this point, I'd never seen anything like it before.
Had you heard about him before?
Yeah, of course. Okay. Yeah, I mean, at this point, you had your ghost shows and stuff like that. But I will say that I guess at that point, any sort of knowledge of orbs was kind of restrained to FLIR, night vision cameras on the ghost show, what was the first one? Ghost hunters, I guess. Yeah. And so I didn't even think of them in the sense of being colored.
So this one was, you said, kind of an orangish?
Yeah, sort of an orangish red, and it was so bright. It was completely the only thing. So this is really weird, and I've thought of this ever since. Do you remember as a kid, we had these things, they were these little balls, and they had a little metal squares on each end, and when you put both of your fingers touched, it would light up the ball. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that, but it's funny that you say that. So recently we went to this little kids science store
right
in Michigan.
It was one of those things.
And it's it had it was a tube, and basically you just once you complete the circuit, it lights up. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly the same thing. Well, I had one that was a little ball, when I was a kid that my mom brought back from somewhere. But it was kind of like that, where it was so bright. And I'm sure it was so bright because I was, literally, maybe a foot from it. Which in retrospect, we've talked about this, but I still, every time I think about this, I still wonder, what would have happened if I would have touched this thing? Because, is it plasma? Would it have done the same thing that
just instantly melt you're just instantly melted?
Yeah, the whole place just explodes. Or the ball lightning thing, which we just talked about,
Yeah.
But it was one of the weirdest things. It was so bright, but then on the inside, right at the very center, it was almost kind of like a milky, sort of whitish, like fire, the hottest in the center is sort of white, and then it kind of gradiates out, or white to blue and then gradiates out.
So is this bright enough? Sorry for all the questions. But
No.
Is this bright enough to where you're having to shield your eyes with your hand and squint, or?
Kind of. Well, let's just say this. So when I first woke up, it was so bright that, and again, it was the perfect kind of orangey kind of red that it looked over my shoulder. I legitimately thought that my whole loft was going up in flames.
Man.
The whole loft was basically lit up. And as I continue on, that won't ever totally happen like this again. This was sort of I would say the brightest kind of occurrence, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway,
you're sitting there on your bed, or the edge of the bed, peeking, very scared. Thinks the house is on fire.
Right. Yeah.
What do you do next?
So
you just kind of hide under the covers and hope for the best, or what's going on?
No, it was one of those things where it was so surreal and so I don't know. It wasn't really a fear. Once I saw that that my place wasn't catching on fire, it was sort of more it immediately switched to curiosity. And so the second that I made quote unquote eye contact, I guess, with it. The second that I saw it, it was like, and again, a lot of this is, memory's a little wonky, so it feels like it's a lot longer, in my mind. I'm sure it was like just literally a couple of seconds, but it feels like in my mind, I remember when I first, so imagine you're kind of like just in one motion, like going from like flipping from facing in one direction, flipping to the other side of your bed. It was like, hands on the edge of the bed and then like barely like able to like look over the edge. And in my memory, I remember it was just very sort of stationary, just kind of like floating. But then it was like the second that, I don't know any other way to say it, but it was like the second that it knew that I was looking at it, it kind of went from like being very still to like this funny kind of like wobbling,
like vibrating, kind of like just like boom.
Not really vibrating, just this sort of like kind of like sort of dopey like.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then it just went right into the wall, and then it disappeared.
Oh, okay, man. I got to unpack this for a second. Okay, so what you're saying is like as soon as almost like it could feel that 100% of your concentration and awareness is now focused on it. The second that happens, it starts to kind of like wobble around. Like, is it just kind of like making left and right movements, or is it just kind of like in a little bit of a pattern, kind of staying in the same sort of general area, but then just kind of like shifting around within that area kind of thing?
Yeah, so it was... Okay,
First off,
so...
Also, hold on just a second here. This is a prime example of how our minds would work completely differently. I'm not... Like, that already wouldn't be like, oh, man, I feel at ease here. I'd run out of I'd be gone.
Well, that's a part of it, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something that I will bring up as I keep going. But as somebody who's sort of experienced some stuff, throughout my life, like I had a Shadow Man encounter, which is on episode, I think our first Halloween episode, right?
I mean, yeah.
As somebody I've had like some weird encounters with the paranormal, if you will, and I've always had like and actually you can, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where I've always had this like sort of like discernment where it's like I can feel if like something's going sideways,
Yeah, except for when you're like having a conversation with someone and you just feel it's the exact opposite. You feel you're like saying stuff that is mildly inappropriate or something, maybe even insulting, and I'm just thinking like any second now he's going to turn it around, and then you don't, and that person doesn't like you anymore. And
I'm just trying to. That's just me pushing the boundaries of social constructs. But
yeah, okay.
No, but so. I've always kind of been able to lean on my gut, my feeling, and there was absolutely zero feeling of malevolence or like darkness, anything like that. Like it didn't even after. So basically, as it sort of wobbled, took a second to like sort of wobble into the wall and disappeared. It was like I sat up. I remember like sitting up in the bed, and I was sort of like, what was that? And then immediately I thought, oh, I'll be able to see it out the window, and jumped up.
Hold on, before you get there. So, okay, so it's weeble wobble, and then it just kind of like fast, like zooms to the wall and through
No.
Or is it just kind of like a slow, like, and then, whoo?
Yeah,
does it like make any kind of like, I don't know, is there any kind of like light residue or anything that happens when it goes through? Is it just like, there's almost no difference. Like it just passes through the wall. Yeah,
it's very much like, I cannot think of the 80s movie. There's some 80s movie where it shows like these bubbles, and it's clear that I said that like 10 times.
It's clearly.
It's very clear that that's like an effect that was probably taken on like over like a green screen or something. So you know that it's like separate, you know, and it just sort of phases out as it goes into the wall. I can't think of the movie, but
I know I can see exactly what scene you're talking about in my head, but I don't, for whatever reason, it's not coming to me.
But yeah, as a fan of like comics and sci-fi and like all that kind of stuff, you would think that there would be, well, at least in my mind, I would have thought like there would have been some sort of like blast or, you know, like something. Spark or residue or something. No, it just, it's like it just sort of phased right into the wall. And like,
and then now your mounting curiosity kind of triggers you to bolt out of the bed.
Well, no, there was like still like a couple seconds where once it did that, it was like I sat up in bed and it was less curiosity, more like what just happened? Like, because it was so bizarre and so like unlike anything, you know, there was, and I was still kind of, I don't want to say I definitely wasn't half asleep, but I mean, I had just been asleep, you know, less than, 15 seconds ago, so it all happened.
Like trying to knock the cobwebs off a little bit.
Yeah, it was sort of like, am I still sleeping? Like, what just happened? And then I had the realization, like, oh, maybe I can see it out the window. So I immediately jumped up, ran to the front window, and unfortunately, there was nothing. This would be a pattern as we go on, that whatever is happening, however these things are sort of like phasing out of my room, they're not like, I don't know if they turn like invisible or what, but it's not like they're just like sort of just passing through like Shadowcat or Kitty Pryde from the X-Men. It's not like you see anything on the other end. It's like once they sort of phase out of the room, they're just completely gone.
Man.
So anyway, that was the first one. It was very, very weird. I didn't tell anybody this. I didn't tell my closest friends. I didn't tell anybody because I just didn't know. As much as I loved like weird stuff and like, my oldest friend, Jesse Phillips, he's a good friend of the show, good friend of ours. Him and I were like, we saw like I think I mentioned on the last episode actually, where we saw the UFO out in my yard when we were kids through the tent. You would think that I would have immediately, told him, because he would have been somebody on that wavelength.
Right. He was like already accepting of the strange.
Right.
Stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But this was like
it was like next level.
Yeah, this had no sort of like narrative or whatever that made sense to me. So like I didn't even tell him about this.
Well, let me ask you a question too. Like in your mind, immediately are you like, okay, maybe that was an alien? Or are you thinking
no?
Like, okay.
No, and that's the thing that was another thing that was weird too, is like as much as I was into all that stuff, like aliens and UFOs and all that stuff, it just didn't feel like I had no feeling of like, oh, this is demonic or this is like an like some sort of alien like drone probe kind of thing. Like there was none of that. And I think because of like the feeling of like, I just didn't have that like gut feeling that I've always been able to kind of like count on. You know what I mean? So if there would have been any little bit of like tinge of like fear or like, uh-oh, something's not right here. Like, which we'll get into.
Thumbing through the Bible and just casting those demons out.
Which that's an important quote. I mean, that's an important part of the story, because as we go along, like that'll change. So
after these messages, we'll be right back.
This is Amy Poehler. My new movie, Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, is coming to theaters June 14th, and it's making me feel joy and sadness and anger, definitely some disgust, Rose, and I think a little fear. Really? But I'm also feeling these new emotions like anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui.
It's what you call the boredom.
Okay, that one was weird. It's gonna be the feel everything movie of the summer. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, only in theaters June 14th. Get tickets now.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no dead.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now back to our show.
Okay, so that was years and years ago.
Hold on. Can I say something before you go any further? I want to make sure that the audience understands my perspective of all of this and kind of like why I'm asking you questions while you're telling it. First, I got to be honest, orbs in general have always been the thing that I was most skeptical about.
Yeah,
I
same.
guess. Mainly because, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of times when people talk about them and stuff, you're really kind of seeing like security cam footage or, whatever. And for me, a lot of those times it's like, oh, those that I'm seeing are sort of like dust particle type stuff, reflections, that kind of thing.
Right. Condensation. Or
yeah. I mean,
moisture.
But every now and then you'll see like some footage that you're like, no, that's not dust.
Yeah. Like the ones that I send you from my baby cam.
And so it is important for me to kind of tell folks like, I get it, man. This is one of those things where I'm like, okay, man, come on. But this is like something different, right? Your experience that you just talked about, this orange one, isn't like you're not going to get woken up in the middle of the night to a bright orange light and think, boy, that dust is, boy, it sure is dusty in here. I don't know. Right. I guess I'm going to have to clean that up because it woke me up, This is something completely different. So part of the reason why I am asking questions in real time while you're telling us all this is, I think you've told me some, if not all of this before, but it's been a long time. And so I don't remember almost any of it. And that's not because I don't care. I purposely kind of, especially now that we've started the podcast, I kind of want to hear it in real time like the listeners are. So anyway, sorry.
No, you're fine.
What was the next one?
Well, before I move on, something that you just said, the idea that like, so I at the time, I didn't associate even the term orbs or like what you see on ghost hunters or anything like that. I didn't, that and then the quote unquote orb that I saw, like I never associated those two. I just assumed that like, I don't know. I guess I think at the time I assumed that it was like some sort of like, geomagnetic or some sort of natural phenomenon that I just didn't know about maybe. Because again, this was...
Now, at this point, had you been... Because, the last episode was about ball lightning and swamp gas and stuff. And that's kind of what got us on this conversation. Like, were you kind of aware of that stuff as well? Or
Yes.
Okay.
I only knew about it through, the J. Allen Hynek. Because I was so big into UFO lore and 60s UFO reports and all that stuff. I think maybe I did think that maybe it did have something to do with ball lightning, I guess. But again, this was early 2000s. And so it wasn't as easy, at least with this time, to just, hop on the internet and
do some research and stuff.
Yeah. And just get there's your answer. It wasn't as we weren't there yet, really. So it was just one of those things where as soon as after it happened, I look out the window and I'm just sort of like, I was just kind of dumbfounded. And it was so bizarre, so abstract, so away from anything else that I could think of that I just sort of, which is weird to say, but I guess I just sort of brushed it off and just thought, oh, well, that was pretty cool. I guess I just witnessed some sort of, natural phenomenon or something, or maybe it had something to do with me being like half asleep or, it's like I just figured out a way to talk myself out of seeing something that my brain like couldn't explain, Literally didn't tell a single person for years and years. From that until the next time I would see something, the previous band had broke up. We started our band, The Modern Society.
Here we go.
I think it was in the earlier days. So it was, I know that this was like in the winter. I guess we had played a show. I can't remember exactly where. By this point, we were touring our butts off and rehearsing almost every single night and writing all the time and touring as much as we could. By this time, I'd moved back from California. I was living in the loft now, so same place. It just looks, better and homelier. And, I had a TV now, and then I had my art desk set up. Everything was cool. It was no longer just like a glorified practice space. So we had played a show, which this is a pretty common thing. We played a show, we load out super late, midnight, 1 o'clock, and then we had to drive back. And even from Atlanta, my house was about an hour and 20 minutes, hour, 30 minutes maybe, some nights. So it was very, very late. And I dropped all you guys off, drove the van back, and I was getting ready for bed. I was like dozing off, and like the sun was, beginning to come up. The room was like just sort of lit, it's like right when the sun starts kind of coming up, and I'm looking up at the ceiling. I'm laying on my back, which is kind of weird because I never sleep that way. I sleep on my side, but I guess I was so tired and it was so late that I'm kind of facing forward, and something kind of catches my attention that would be sort of in the direction of like my feet, and I see something, and it looks to be sort of like a bluish, whitish kind of light, kind of like moving around. It was like the movement that caught my eye too, because like...
Talk to me about size. Is it about the same size, or is it...
No. So this one, so I'm still looking up, and I'm realizing that like, oh my God, I think it's the same thing. But like, again, it was this sort of, it was like hard to like get myself into the mode of believing that something was actually happening. Just because I had such a hard time believing the last one, So I'm thinking, all these thoughts are just sort of like going through my head. I'm like, well, maybe it's like the reflection of like the sun barely coming up. Maybe it's like hitting some sort of light and creating some sort of like reflecting effect, So it would be my bed, and then to my feet across the room would be my art desk, and then like a TV sort of mounted on the wall. And so it was this little light, and it was the movement that like caught my eye. It wasn't like bouncing. It was just kind of like something was like moving around. Very like slow, and it wasn't, at least from my memory, it wasn't like the wobbly thing yet, but it was this sort of like bluish white thing. So I kept like looking up, but I was kind of like able to see it like in my peripheral vision, and I knew that like I just had this feeling like if I adjust myself, if I like lean up and like directly look at this thing, it's going to disappear. It was like I just had this kind of like knowing, and I don't know if it was just something that I had in my head because of the last time,
like just buried deep in your subconscious.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it was, but it was like I just knew that that's what was going to happen. So I, and again, this was probably over the course of like 30 seconds, maybe. So it was relatively fast, but of course it felt like a long time. I mean, in my mind, it was like, I'm not going to look. I'm just going to try to like witness this thing like as it is. But it was like the curiosity totally got the best of me this time. And finally, I tried to be, I didn't like jump up or anything. I just like raised my head like really slow to try to be like kind of stealthy about it. Raised my head because it was like I was able to see something, but I wasn't able to see it. And I was like, I can't do this any longer. Like I have to at least get a visual of it. So I did it really slow. And again, it was like the second that my eyes sort of were able to see it, this one was probably about as big as like, maybe like a racquetball.
Okay.
Or like...
What a reference, man. How often you been playing racquetball?
Oh, well, the reason I know what a racquetball is because me and my girls started buying these racquetballs, and if you can cut them just in the right line down the center, they do those like little pop things.
No idea what you're talking about.
You know, they're like little domes, and you fold them under.
Okay, yeah.
And they shoot up. Well, when I was a kid, we had like some sort of like industrial rubber ones that would shoot like
super high.
Super high. They don't make those anymore, probably because some kid lost it, like broke his hand by it. But so we figured out that like, oh, well, you can cut these racquetballs, and they basically do the same thing.
Okay. So the size of a racquetball, maybe golf ball, ping pong ball.
Yeah,
around that size.
Yeah, around that
Just
size.
one.
Only one.
Okay.
And it was sort of this blue, and again, like
super bright, like, or just like faint in comparison to the orange one.
Not nearly as bright at all compared to the orange one. But I don't really know. In retrospect, I don't know if that's because it was like pitch black when I saw the orange one.
Yeah.
Or if like the sun was like barely coming up, that it was...
Talk to me about like what you were feeling at this point. Again, were you kind of like any kind of fear, or was it just, again, just sort of like curiosity and calm, and you're doing, like you were describing, you're doing like the Dumb and Dumber like moves, trying to make it seem like you weren't looking at it.
Right.
And then finally when you looked over at it, what does it do?
Yeah. So it was like I thought that I'm like being like super still, because that is one thing about me. If you know me, you'll know this, that like
stealth.
I'm very stealthy. Like if I'm getting up in the middle of the night to like, or every morning I get up, I'll leave my wife in bed. I'm going to like, slowly turn the handle. Like everything is very calculated. And I don't even know why that is, but so everything about
it's called
me
being
is
courteous, man. And somehow we both married two girls that don't, like, when it comes to like walking around the house,
shit about that.
When somebody's sleeping,
exactly.
Things are just
walking right on their heels.
Like, I don't even understand why you're wearing high heels at 6 a.m.
Exactly.
Just to go to the bathroom, but somehow you managed. Okay.
Yeah, so in my mind, I'm thinking, there's no way this thing knows or is going to see me, because it was so, I mean, it was so slow that like there's no way. But again, as we go on, like you'll start to see that like there's something about like it definitely, these things definitely have like a sentience. That's definitely a pattern, but there is something about it where it's like it knows whenever you're looking directly at it.
See, this is where it becomes extremely fascinating to me, because it's not like, again, it's not like we're not talking about dust particles that are just floating around randomly,
right?
And riding the air conditioner current or whatever. We're talking about stuff that like it's so bizarre, man. Turns out he had an aneurysm.
Well, no. So the interesting thing about that too is, well, let me just keep going, because this ties in with something that gets really interesting to me. So again, I slowly kind of like raise my head. My back is still completely flat. I'm not even like lifting up. I'm just my head is like moving so very slowly forward. But again, the second that I was able to get like a good view of it, it's like it did that thing again. It does this little like before, it was like I could see it like moving, and it was moving like perfectly, like gravity didn't play any sort of role in it. There was nothing that was like, it was so like smooth, if that makes sense. And again, I'm looking at it from like my periphery, so maybe I'm inaccurate in that, but just from what I witnessed, this is what it felt like or feels like. It's a lot smoother, but again, the second that like I was able to look at it, it was like it kind of did that thing where it just sort of like dopily just sort of like wobbled into the wall, and then yet again it just completely disappeared.
Wow. Man.
I would then immediately jump up, immediately look out the window, and nothing there.
Right.
Of course.
Same spot in the wall or different wall?
No, across the room. So the first time it was like, if you were laying in my bed in the loft, and this is just for you.
First, there's like a treasure chest on one side. And then if you take 3 steps to the right, then there's a blanket. And then, I'm sorry, I thought we were just like talking about just a bunch of stuff that didn't matter. Go ahead.
No, so the other one was like where my nightstand was to the right of the bed if you're laying in my bed. This would have disappeared. Which actually, this is pretty interesting. I haven't even thought about this, but the first one where it like phased out of the wall would have been close to the outlet that I had my laptop plugged into, right? This one, and I'm literally just thinking about this now, this one would have kind of phased out, which would have been almost right beside the outlet where my art, like desk lamp, would have been plugged into. I don't know if there's any sort of correlation there, but I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so I see this thing again. I don't think I told anybody again at this point. Like, I don't specifically remember telling you. I'm pretty sure I didn't tell you. And at this point, like, you and I, like, we would talk about weird stuff, but you weren't totally. Weird. Yeah, I
totally would have been like, dude, come on, man. Made it up.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I don't know if I told my buddy Jesse or not. For some reason, maybe I
called your old bandmates.
Maybe mentioned it to my ex-girlfriend, but I don't think so. I think I kept it to myself again.
For fear that like people just wouldn't understand or like, you know what I mean? Like what?
Well, partially, but then I think a lot of it just had to do with the fact that like, even though like I was into all this other stuff, it was like I'm pretty like OCD with this. Is just sort of the way that I like can, I guess, sort of sum it up. The reason I didn't say anything is like I'm into all this other stuff, and I can kind of explain check all the boxes of why I believe this. You know what I mean? But this was so far like out of like I just had no idea what this was. You know, and I knew that like it didn't feel like.
Was there any part of you? And I think this is something that any sort of, I guess, skeptic would want to know. But was there any part of you that thought maybe it was like imagination, or were you like, no way, I have won?
No, there's no way. But I will say,
and I'm not saying now. I just mean at the time.
Right. I absolutely not, because it was. I mean, I was 100% awake. The second time, this past one, I didn't even have a chance to doze off yet.
Yeah, right.
And that's kind of another interesting thing I think with this one too is like, and I've often like wondered, like how long had it been there? Like was it just hanging out over there when I came up the stairs at 5 o'clock in the morning?
You know, dude, it's weird that you say that, because when you first started describing this one, the first thing that kind of came to my mind was like some sort of like, it's almost like, this might sound weird, but like it was kind of trying to get your attention so that you would look at it, so that the orb could get a good look at you, and then it was like, I can't be here too long. Pew.
I mean, maybe, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I again, this is why I didn't tell anybody, just because I had zero like explanation for any of it. So
and
it was
back
like,
then, that was something that you keep yourself. Now, us having zero explanation in the hunt to find possible explanations. Now, this is where we are now. Welcome to Camper at Strangeness.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. So this is where the timing gets weird. So I'm trying to think like where it would have picked up again after this. So we were already in the band. Like so possibly I saw another one between that point and then from near like the end of the band days when I would go into like meet my wife and we would start dating, and then she would start coming over. I feel like I did see something, but they all kind of like run together. So I'm not sure. I can't specifically remember, so we'll say that I didn't see anything until, I don't know, years, another like little span of several years.
Well, it's interesting because like throughout that time, I mean, gosh, man, it's funny. Like I was thinking about this a couple weeks ago with Ann and stuff. It's like during those years, man, yeah, I had an apartment here, but I was barely there because we were always gone. You know what I mean? Like we were gone more than so I'm like paying rent for a place that like I really wasn't even in, you know? And so maybe that had something to do with the fact that you didn't have many
that's
experiences
true.
during that time was because you didn't really live there as much,
We were
you know?
never home, yeah. Well, and if we were coming back home, it was similar to that where it's like, oh, we're coming back at 4 or 5 in the morning.
That brings another point. Like, do you think there was something inside of the QT taquitos that we would get that would cause hallucinations such as these?
I mean, if there was, then those QT taquitos are 100% to blame because we ate
1,000 of
our
them.
weight.
Boy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think no matter what, we should do an experiment, and that is we head up to that old loft, you know, get a couple of sleeping bags and 10 to 15 QT taquitos and just see if they come back.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so fast forward several more years after, and I think that may have been part of the reason too that I didn't mention it to anybody is because they were such sort of anomalous, like one-off sort of things. You know what I mean? Like I do remember when I saw the blue one for the second time, it was so like, oh my God, yes. I was like so excited because it meant like, oh, you weren't dreaming. You weren't like insane or it really sort of validated me. You know what I mean? But then again, you know, it's like nothing, I kind of got excited, but then like nothing happened for the longest time. And, you know, life took over and the band and, you know, that was it. And so several years go by. I hadn't seen any of these things in a while. I started dating my wife. Well, we had been dating for a while, but I think she had just started like coming over and maybe had like stayed the night like
I mean,
once
is that
or twice.
okay for all those?
I don't care. I'm a 40-year-old man. So
Courtney's over there. It's another.
Well. So before Courtney's over there. So I do remember this one, and this is probably like the most uneventful one. So I remember.
If it's uneventful, maybe we just say like.
Well, no. I remember where I was drawing at my art desk, and I remember like sometimes like the birds would like hit this back window for some odd reason. And I think maybe because it like both windows, like, you know, if you jumped through the back window and kept running, you would fly out the front window, you know. So maybe they're like seeing all the way through.
Maybe, yeah.
I remember hearing something. I was drawing, and this was like in the like afternoon, and I think it was like around summertime-ish. But I think it was a bird. I just remember hearing something. Something got my attention, and I remember looking back. And when I looked back, like across the room, like where, like coming up the stairs, like at the top of the stairs, I could have swore I saw like at least one, but I think it was like two like little orange balls. But the way the sun would like kind of come through those windows, you know, it was kind of hard to like tell, and it was so fast. And this wasn't like I see it, and then it like wobbles out. Like this was sort of like the sun was like beating down, so they would have been like right in that like sunbeam kind of thing. So maybe my eyes weren't able to adjust to see them sort of wobble into the wall, but like it was like as soon as I looked back, I could have swore I saw something, and then it was like I didn't see him anymore. So this would have been like the first time that I saw him, you know, in years. And this is when Courtney and I are together. So I was kind of like, oh my God, I think I saw another one. And sort of, you know, so I'm kind of like perked up at this point. So throughout this time, before she saw them, there was another time where I'm sleeping and I see same kind of thing over in the same place, like under that back window, you know, I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would see a little, I think it was sort of like a bluish white one kind of deal. Same kind of thing. The main thing that I remember out of this one is that when I woke up, my eyes were watering. And that, to my knowledge, or at least I'd never noticed, it was like, oh, that's weird. Maybe was I like crying in my sleep, or like was there something going on emotionally or whatever. Well, then my wife comes to stay the night, and I'm facing up. I'm laying on my back. My wife is to the right of me, but she's facing my direction. So she would be, she's on her side, so she's looking to my left. And she was the first person that I knew that had like, well, no, you had one, but like, at that point, I never had like an Apple iPhone, or like an iPad, or like a, God, what am I trying to say? Or a laptop.
Okay, yeah.
So
MacBook.
I wasn't, I wasn't familiar with like the breathing of it, I mean, I knew about it, but I didn't have one. So
meaning, you mean like the light, sort of like,
yes.
When you say breathing, sort of like going from dark to light, almost like a blink,
I think
like a slow blink.
Yeah, I think they call it like breathing or whatever. And it lets you know like the battery's good, or actually, I don't know why it does that, but
I don't know.
I thought it was really cool at the time. But I remember out of my periphery, I see a light, and I don't really even think of anything about it. I think that that's her MacBook, and I think that it's like the light that's breathing. Suddenly, I feel this like movement where she like jumps up and like grabs onto me and like totally is like, oh God, like one of those like freak out moments, and I'm like, what? Because it startles me, because I'm fully aware of like what I think is the laptop, but I'm not even remotely thinking that it's anything, So she like freaks out, and then I jump up, and it like scares me kind of, because I'm like, I'm ready to fight. Like it's like one of those like, kind of deals, and I tense up, and I look over, and when I look over, I see, I think it was more than one, but I know for a fact it was one. And again, it's like a little blue ball. This one was about as big as a ping pong ball. You remember there was like a red chest that was like my nightstand on the left side of my bed. So it kind of like, it was down like underneath that black, like tall coffee table thing with the bar stools. It kind of disappears behind. And also, I guess maybe because she had seen it first, by the time that I like shot up and looked over, I just caught like the tail end of it, like go
almost like it was
past.
already. It was aware that like someone's aware.
She had seen it.
Was
okay. Right. So it wasn't like waiting on me. I'm like, it's cool. I didn't want to say anything, but I've been seeing these things. It was like finally, I like came out. I told her the whole deal. She's like freaking out, and I was like, man, I thought it was like I thought it was your laptop. Blah 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 blah. Weird thing, when all this is happening, I realized my eyes had started pouring water again.
Weird.
So throughout this time, there would be this pattern that would sort of emerge where, and this is the thing that I think is like maybe the most fascinating about it. Well, on the one hand, I think the most fascinating part is you hear all these people talk about their quote unquote orbs, but I don't know that I've ever heard accounts of people being so close to them, because like the furthest away would be like this thing would be like 10 or 12 feet away, or maybe 20 feet away if it was like the one like over totally across the loft or whatever. But the thing that started to emerge, and this is where I think the sentience comes. This is where I think that idea that like it knows when you're looking at it, so it knows like, oh, I got to get out of here. One thing that started to happen was, well, at least I started noticing. I don't know if this could have actually happened before, is that, I don't know, maybe 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds before I would see one or we would see one, my eyes would just start pouring water.
Weird, man.
So it was like some kind of like something in the atmosphere, something in the environment was like triggering this like response. I don't know if it's like a fight or flight response. Again, there's no fear. There's no like...
No emotion tied to it.
Not at all. Not at all. So the thing disappeared. Courtney's still freaking out. She's like, you know, like shaking, like holding on. And I'm like, I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. You know, I've been seeing these things.
Hey, by the way, thanks for coming over.
There's alien drones in the house. No, so, you know, I'm kind of like explaining it to her.
First you're like, whoa, what? Was it the shadow guy or the like ball of light flying around? And she's like, I'm out of here. Okay.
Well, and the other thing with her is she is like hard skeptic, like hard no for everything. And if she has seen something, it's immediately demonic. There's no... it's probably why she doesn't listen to the podcast, but like, you know, it's like, she doesn't believe anything. Like we saw a UFO when we lived in our townhouse, so much so, like I've said before on the show, like we called MUFON out and she was 100% like, yeah, we definitely saw something. And it was the weirdest thing. It was like, as the days went on, like within about a week had, you know, as
like,
a
guess
week.
It was probably an owl.
Yeah. It was like, I think it was just a Chinese balloon. And it's like, what? Or a Chinese lantern.
Okay.
So anyway, so here's the interesting part about this. You know, I knew she was super skeptical, but also like pretty religious in the sense of like, you know, if it's something that I can't explain, it's like, it leans into like the dark, you know, it's like demonic. It's like that. So she was freaking out. Again, I have yet to feel any kind of like fear, any kind of darkness about it. So we're sort of talking about it, and I was like, yeah, you know, I didn't know how to explain it. I thought you would think I was insane, yada, yada, yada. Plus, I just thought it was like your computer doing its like breathing thing. And her response is, that doesn't make any sense because my computer doesn't show red. And I was like, huh? What are you talking about? Like, I had no idea what she was talking about. Basically, come to find out, I was seeing blue. What she saw was red, which is really interesting. So at this point, I kind of became like obsessed with this. And this is like, I don't know, what year would this be? Again, I'm so bad with
I mean,
years.
at least like, I would say, what is it, 2022, 2011-ish?
Yeah. So the internet is, you know, much more advanced. So I kind of got, you know, really into it. I remember going to the library, like trying to find stuff about it. I do remember finding a forum post from this girl who said that her and her boyfriend, and it was like the only thing that I could find that was, because everything you would look up would be like, oh, it's condensation. Oh, it's dust particles. It's like I even got to the point where I stopped even using the term orb because it was just, it just wasn't. It wasn't that. Yeah, it was something totally different. I think I even started looking up like plasma balls in house or blah 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 blah, and I came across this one like forum post where this guy and his girlfriend were playing video games and they were sitting on the floor, and I think they like happened to like glance over, and it was like word for word, same thing. I think he saw like red, she saw a completely different color, and they would see them around their house, but they would always just be around like the baseboards, which is exactly what happened with us. But that was it. That was the only thing that was even remotely close as far as like any sort of research or whatever. So this would go on several times. I can't remember exactly how many more. I do know that like...
Always in the loft.
Always in the loft.
Okay.
Never anywhere else. So this is where it gets a little weird. So she...
We will return after these messages.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures
from another dimension, another world. I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
It got to the point, though, where it was so, well, number one, she stopped coming over for a while because she was just, like, terrified of it. Like, she just thought, like, oh, well, this is something I can't explain. This isn't normal. It's, like, scary, yada, yada, yada. So, but it got to the point where there was one time where she, like looked over at me, and we were just like facing each other. We were just like talking, like, like laying in the bed talking to each other. And she's like talking, and then all of a sudden she just like, her eyes like get wide because she can see, I guess, in like the light, maybe like a night light of the TV or something. Like she sees like my eyes just start welling up with water. And then she sees like the drip, like, when your eyes like well up, it gets to the point where it's like full of water, and then it just like lets go, Mm-hmm. She saw that, and she like got like really scared. And then we ended up seeing another one. I can't remember like what it was. At this point, I'm like getting really into this because I'm like, there is something that is happening in this loft that is almost happening on a daily basis. I feel like at this point I had told you
mm-hmm.
when.
Yeah, but I think like, again, only because my experience with the word orb
right
would have been like, and I was just thinking, oh, cool, man.
Mm-hmm.
And just thought like, oh, does it just mean like you caught it in your old camera?
Right.
The old, what was
Lomo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I told you, and I know that like I told Jesse, and we actually had a plan where we were going to use, he had like a video camera, like a little camera that you could do video for like hours, and we were going to set it up in the loft because it got to the point where it was happening almost like maybe 2 to 3 times a week. It was so consistent at this point, and it was like it just ramped up, and it was like it just kept getting like
various colors, or
no, it was always either that sort of reddish orange or bluish white. I never saw like the green lightsaber or the purple lightsaber, or it was always like just that. But saying lightsaber, it did kind of have that sort of like.
I see what you're saying. So it's like it's almost like it's
like lighter on the middle kind of thing. Okay, so here's where it gets weird. Like I said, I became obsessed with it. I feel like in retrospect, I was really kind of like opening myself up to be like, man, I can't wait to see it. I gotta see one of these things. Every waking moment was like on the internet, trying to see if anybody like, and at this point I was looking into like ball lightning and like some sort of like, it's gotta be some sort of like geomagnetic thing or some sort of like electrical discharge or some sort of plasma buildup. I'd looked into like a lot of folklore and like will-o'-the-wisps and everything we talked about the last episode, basically. Mm-hmm. And
it was kind of like eliminating the possibilities, right? Like
I was trying to, and it was difficult because again, like it was like the orb thing, like just typing in like the keyword orb was just so far away from what I was seeing that I wasn't even looking down that road anymore. It was like I was seeing like these like little similarities of like, well, it is similar to ball lightning that it does this, and it is kind of similar to like will-o'-the-wisps and like like folklore, how like the sort of wobbly nature of it. So I was like finding all these things, but I still just couldn't lock down like what it was, and I still can't. So folks out there, I would love to hear anybody, if you've had anything remotely close to this, like, man, please write in, because it's still something that really fascinates me. But
and just as a friendly reminder, it's one of those things too, just like Tyler took so long to even tell his closest friends, we get it. So you might be nervous or worried to kind of, tell us about your experiences and stuff, but we won't share your name or anything like that if you don't want us to.
Right.
Or we can give you the credit if you want that as well. So just a friendly reminder.
Yes, absolutely. And this is just because I guess I was so intimately like close with this phenomenon, and it did become so consistent. I'm still fascinated with it. So again, like anything even remotely like this, maybe it's not exactly like, please write in because I would love to hear it. But so here's where I think, here's where things kind of go wrong. So like I said, it was getting to the point where it was happening like very, very consistently, like 2, 3, 4 times a week, to the point where my buddy and I were we were planning on like, you know, in the next week or so, we were planning on setting up a camera in the corner, you know, all night just to see if it would appear so we could get evidence. And I still believe that, you know, my sister, you know, bought the house since then and it's just empty up there. But man, I still kind of think that if somebody's willing to go up there and set up a camera, I think you'll easily find something. But anyway, I was becoming like obsessed with it. That's all I wanted to talk about. You know, anytime Courtney and I were together, we would like go out with like friends, like double dates or you know, whoever, like her friends, it would always come up in conversation. Just because, like we just said, it was like I just had such a hope that like somebody had like kind of seen something, you know? And I was just like dying to hear somebody else that had a similar experience. So anyway, there was one night where Courtney and I were hanging out and suddenly over her shoulder, I don't see an orb this time. I don't see the dopey little bouncing ball. I see what looks like a camera flash across the room.
Oh boy.
And when this happened, and again, my eyes did well up like right before it would happen, but the second that it happened, I have maybe never felt, even with like the shadow man thing that I saw as a kid, I'd never felt a sense of like absolute like dread like I did in that moment. And Courtney saw it, I guess, in her like periphery. You know, I can't speak for her, but she saw it light up the room. I mean, I'm talking like old school, like Polaroid, like flash, like just like rip across the room.
Like okay, lit the room or like traveled across the room?
Like lit up, like, but also like traveled. So for some reason I think of, and I think you even made the reference last episode, but it was similar to like how the electricity gremlin, you know, gremlins,
okay, yeah.
You know, but
I was just trying to make sure I could differentiate between like, you know, was it a, and I mean,
imagine like somebody is like 7 foot tall and they're holding a camera and they're running across the room and they go flash.
Okay.
And it went, and it was like, it was above.
So it was like a series of flashes that started and ended, like it was like, you know, one flash on one end of the room, a flash like closer to the middle, and then a flash on the other side of the room,
kind of. And it was super fast. It was like flash. And it was like the room felt like it was like darker. I mean, I'm talking, and I'm not trying to be like, you know, Billy Badass here, but like a lot of stuff doesn't necessarily always like scare me that it like should. Like I've never been afraid of the dark. I've never been like stuff like that just doesn't scare me. And this was so scary that we literally slept with the lights on the rest of the night. And I think I even slept with the light. She didn't come back for like a week or something, but I think I even slept with the lights on for like several nights before. And it happened 2 more times. Never like 3 like that. It would just be like a single flash. Mm-hmm. But I feel like, so this is, well, do you want to get into theories now?
Yeah. I mean, do you want me to tell you kind of like sort of what I kind of think a little bit? And
yeah. Let's get into it. Well, let me just say this. I think I don't know that I believe at this point that the two were related.
Okay.
I do, however, think that when I became like so obsessed and I really was like opening myself up to like see more things and I do think somehow like some sort of like darker entity was like, oh, well, the door's open, so Let's hop on in. And I think that's what the flash was. I don't think, I mean, it's weird because they're both sort of anomalous light phenomenon, but I don't think.
But they were different, really.
I think they were totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, I haven't had real prior knowledge about orbs. I always kind of just thought of them as like, dust particles or whatever that people catch on camera. So whenever I was kind of like learning about them, before I knew you were going to talk about them on our show, I kind of read some stuff and again became more sort of intrigued by it in terms of one of the, and I'm sure there's multiple theories about what they are. I think I read, some people think it is like extraterrestrials communicating in some way or maybe even their form of transportation and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. I also read about how a lot of folks kind of think of them to be more like ghostly in nature, meaning like some sort of spiritual experience. So first, let me just kind of, again, there are multiple definitions of what an orb is, but I think this one is pretty neat. And it basically says that it's generally accepted that a true orb is an orb that is relatively solid from the center without any of the spokes of light that you'd see caused by like light interference or anything. They emit their own light, even if it's just a small amount. And
no, that's exactly right. And sometimes when I would see like the blue ones, it would be like real like dim. So that's interesting. And I don't know if it's like, does that mean they're like, like low on power?
Well, here's what's interesting, man. So I'm sure that folks have heard of orbs and have thought of them, or at least heard of people thinking of them as some sort of like spiritual whatever. Some people think maybe it's like a manifestation of like native spirits.
Right. I've heard angels even as one thing.
Stuff like that. So what I didn't know is that there is sort of like different thoughts on the meaning of the color that you're seeing. Did you know, have you read anything about this?
No.
Okay. I'll read the descriptions of the colors associated with the ones that you saw. So first, let's start with like red or orange, okay? They're generally considered to be warm and protective spirits. Although red and orange can be considered passionate and fiery colors, this is typically not the case when we talk about ghost or spirit orbs. Red orbs could also be a manifestation of the energy of a protector or a caretaker, someone who was watchful in life, perhaps a mother, teacher, or nurse.
Well,
wait, hold it. And then blue orbs. The color blue is often used to try to elicit a calming and healing response. And in the case of orbs, often indicates the presence of a calming or healing energy or spirit. It may also represent some sort of truth, particularly if you are looking for answers or trying to contact a specific spirit from the afterlife. Now, before you keep going, let me say this. So as you're talking, again, you're bad with like dates and that kind of thing.
Terrible.
I'm curious, and I don't know if you can remember this, but I'm curious in terms of the first experience, which was like the orange one, the timing of that. Would you say that happened before or after your Aunt Linda passed away?
That's so funny. I was just about to say that. I feel like maybe it had like just happened. Yeah.
And so I was kind of like holding all this in the entire time you're telling all of your different stories because like, dude, whenever I said, hey, doesn't it seem like it's sort of like something like imagine, a loved one who just wants to see your face, man. And you're kind of like turned to the side and they can't, and so they're trying to like get your attention so they can get a good look of you and then like, whoop, I got to get out of here. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's just what I thought. That's one of my theories.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, like I feel like I had this idea that maybe, it is some sort of like, well, I told you about the idea that I want to turn into a book. What? Like the visual.
I mean, that's already
window.
been written.
Oh, really?
Well, the Book of Mormon with the glasses.
No, stop.
Oh, I love it.
That's a really cool concept. But like, I do feel like once I started kind of learning about orbs hearing about them, knowing that, oh, okay, it's not just dust that people are talking about. I feel like the thing that I can sort of wrap my mind around easiest would be some sort of like window from like whether it's like a loved one that's kind of visiting you or looking down on you or whatever it is, and you just happen to catch it. But, you know, like we always kind of talk about in this shit, there's still rules, you know? And so like if you're in the afterlife, you're like, oh man, I'm not supposed to let them. Okay. Whoop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I do remember when I was looking into it, and again, like it was from the very first one, really throughout, like anytime I would see them, there was like the big like ghost hunters like craze, you know. So which is funny because I'm still kind of like over ghosts in a way, just because like it was everywhere in pop culture, like you know what I mean. You remember all like the
it was like this explosion on the History
tons
Channel
of shows,
or whatever.
yeah. So that was one thing that would come up often, and you know, when I was trying to research this stuff, is like, oh, it's your guardian angel, it's your like a loved one. But I gotta say, I never felt like I'd never felt that as much as I would have. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is like like I said before, I've always been able to like lean on my like discernment and like my like gut feeling of stuff. I've always had sort of an intuition when it comes to like sort of weird, maybe paranormal stuff or whatever. And I just never got a feeling of like good or bad. Like it always, and this is weird coming from me because it's something that is, kind of unexpected for me to say, but I've always felt like it was some sort of like natural, like something that science would maybe get a better hold of like 20 or 50 years from now. But the one thing that I cannot like wrap my head around is that there's definitely like some sort of like sentience to it. There's definitely some sort of like it knows when it's being watched. And what's weird about that is that you look into like Stephen Greer and they go on those UFO hunts, you know, where they see all this stuff. And that's like it's a pretty common thing for people with UFOs. It's like they're like, yeah, the second that it was like it knew that we were watching it and it sped off. I'm not saying I believe it's like a UFO thing. I think my buddy Jesse was like, oh, it's full on, like it's got to be some sort of like drone kind of thing. Like, what was the movie that was it Batteries Not Included?
Oh yeah.
There's like little like, you know, something like that, but like
some sort of like spy drone or something.
Yeah, some kind of like, you know, thing like that. But there's like the thing that I just cannot figure out is like, okay, say it is some sort of like geomagnetic thing or some sort of like something associated with ley lines, or the fact that like just behind my loft is where, you know, I have two creeks that like merge into one, and there's a ton of like quartz deposits in the area. I know like a lot of researchers like ask a lot of that stuff. And yes, I mean, it is kind of a hot spot when you look at all those components, which I think does probably have something to do with like that white thing that I saw that time, and like, you know, just sort of weird stuff that would happen around that area. It just feels sort of magical and like whatever. But I always felt that it was some sort of like a scientific thing, like plasma or some sort of energy that we don't know about yet. But again, it's like I can't wrap my head around like the connection between it just being like an energy thing that we don't know about, and then it having the sentience, and then furthermore, the fact that like, okay, well, what's happening where it's triggering this weird response where it's like before my mind knew this thing was around, it was like triggering this
physical response, yeah.
Some sort of like neurological or physiological response where like my eyes would just start gushing water to the point where like that was how I knew that we were about to see one, which is bizarre. And I mean, maybe, I don't know, is that some sort of like static thing that like maybe that's how your body reacts to large amounts of like static electricity, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But those are the things that they just don't add up. But I will say that like I think that it went from, you know, a big question mark to once the Flash thing started, that was a very, very clear indicator that like, okay, this is not good at all. Like this is like I immediately knew. Whereas like the little balls, you know, they just felt like, oh, it's like it's the way it would feel if you see lightning or fire, or it just felt like something like that. Whereas this thing was like absolute like sheer dread and like terror, which is interesting because that's another thing that people talk about, and we've mentioned it. You know, people in like the Bigfoot community, and they would, you know, and a lot of them, you know, relate it to like possible, maybe it's like some sort of infrasound that like triggers this like dread feeling inside of people. Maybe it's like working on like a subsonic level.
Subsonic levels and stuff.
You know? And so maybe that was that too. But I in retrospect, I feel like I just got too into it that I was willing to like do anything to like see it again and like, oh, I got to figure it out. I really became obsessed with it. And I think that's where you know, it's like people with like Ouija boards or that kind of thing. I think I just really opened myself up and something else was able to step in.
Yeah. Man, that's weird, dude. It's really cool.
I mean, what do you think that the tear thing, like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, dude. That's I thought maybe you're just like a pansy. No,
yeah, probably.
Like I'm not sure because I don't know. I haven't really researched enough sort of like cases of orb encounters to see if maybe that's a common sort of characteristic of the people that experience it. But like, I'm not sure, man. I mean, I think more and more the association of orbs with, I think spirits is probably the most common, right? I mean, and there's even like a tie with orbs or at least ghost lights, because I think sometimes that's what they're called as well.
Yeah.
Ghost orbs or ghost lights, with ghost lights in like Bigfoot too.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
You know?
And another thing too,
and like old battlegrounds, like Gettysburg and stuff.
Yeah, which would make sense of like, oh, well, maybe that's how this like these spirits are able to manifest in this world. You know what I mean? But I will say that I've heard several times, like since then on like podcasts and stuff, there has been like some similarities in. I think there were several folks like throughout the years on the podcast Where Does the Road Go, where they would talk about, you know, whether they were seeing like a UFO or whether they were seeing, like you said, like ghost lights or orbs or whatever. Like one would see one color, and then typically I think if I can remember right, that every time that I've heard that, it's been like a different sex. Like the guy would see this color, and then the girl would see this color.
Yeah,
and that's
a strange.
To me, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, both of you guys saw different colors. Also, what's interesting to me is that the phenomenon didn't follow you from that location. In other words, it only happened to that location. And, you know, I don't want to make you, you know, feel less important or something, but that location is more important than, it's not like your ability to see these things. It's that there's something about that location and you being there kind of thing.
Well, and that's why I feel like it's, I don't know, I still feel like it's like some sort of an electromagnetic thing, or...
Which I think we mentioned this in the last episode. It could very well be. I mean, electricity in that area was pretty weird. And God only knows who wired up the loft in the first place.
Yeah. But, well, I will say this too. You know, since then I have ran across a couple like folks like, you know, Reddit. Like every now and then I'll think about it and I'll be like, I wonder if there's anything out there. It is like somewhat, I mean, I don't want to say common. I want to say maybe a handful throughout the years, but like it is pretty common that people talk about like these little balls of light around their baseboards. The weird part though is that I was upstairs in like a, like, you know, freestanding
right. So it wasn't space. Like super close to the ground.
Yeah, it wasn't close to the ground.
Well, and I found, I don't know if you want me to talk about this one.
No, get into it, man.
Okay, so there's this guy who was a police chaplain in Florida. He's like a church pastor too, and a police chaplain. And he was watching these orbs float around his living room for hours and then caught a lot of it on his security camera. And, well, it is interesting, you know, like the fact that, I mean, again, like if you're going to think of, if there's two like sort of jobs that you would think of as like being able to like, I guess, trust. It sort of goes back to like the, it's kind of like the Falkville Metal Man, right?
Right, yeah.
The guy that reported it was this, I think, like a sheriff, right? A local town, very well known, very well respected. Same with this guy. This guy's a pastor at a church, and he's the police chaplain. So it's like, I don't know if you ever met a lot of chaplains, but there's one at the hospital close by us, the one that you and I both used to work at. His name's Jeff. Nicest man on the planet, guaranteed. It's just interesting to me, man. And I think that, like, again, this is one of those topics where I think a lot of people will say, like, okay, and so.
Yeah, for sure.
It's I don't know. Like, I have not really experienced anything that I haven't been able to explain, I should say. And so it's hard for me to, again, put myself in a situation where I'd be calm during that. I mean, I would immediately just be like, I got to get out of here, never coming back. That's crazy.
It just never felt like menacing at all.
Yeah.
I will say this though, and I'm not going to get super into this because it is a little like on the scarier side, but in the last like couple years, so we've been in this house now for several years. We have baby cameras in both my daughter's rooms. My oldest daughter, Amelia, she like sleepwalks and like does the most bizarre stuff. So we're always kind of like making sure she's cool and not, jumping off the balcony. My youngest is 3, so she has one in her room. I've caught like crazy stuff in their rooms, and it's on both baby cameras. Does the exact same thing. It's not just like one, and they're 2 different brand baby cameras. Same kind of like behavior. She would wake up in the middle of the night and like, oh, weird. That's the exact same time that you can see these like this little orb just hover across the room, and like. It's weird because I just want to keep thinking, oh, it's some sort of weird environmental thing that's making it like dust particles. But what's weird about it is we go on a vacation, it never happens. And that's the thing too, is like we always get an alert on our phones that say like, movement detected in Elliot's room, movement detected in Amelia's room. Nothing happens when we go out of town or when we're not home. I even got to the point where I would cut off the AC, cut off the air to see if like, okay, well maybe it is like dust particles and it's like it's following this like sort of current or something. It doesn't make any difference. The exact same thing happens. So it's really weird. But I will say this, that something that I didn't think of, and if you thought I was crazy before, you're definitely gonna think I'm crazy now. It has kind of made me think, looking back at the, I haven't seen any like self-illuminating, like colored light orbs since I moved away from the loft. But it has made me see these little things, and I'm like, I don't know, man. Is this some sort of like fairy type thing, maybe? Because like I've seen you some videos, like they're really bizarre, like where I was gonna say like even like the alarm company that we use, believe it or not, I just so happen to find an explanation on their site. It says, when in low light settings, your camera may pick up ghost-like orbs while recording. Don't worry, there's nothing supernatural going on. That sounds weird. These orbs are called backscatter or near camera reflection. Backscatter happens when dust, water droplets, yada, 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 yada. So for all you skeptics out there that think, well, they didn't mention that, there you go. We mentioned it, but I have seen the videos. Yeah, it's
weird. And I have a camera too in my basement, and I'll see sort of the dust particles. And
well, that's the thing too. I can tell when it's like dust particles.
Right.
But like these you'll literally see them, it's like
different for sure.
Go around like someone's head, and then like they'll go slow, and then they'll just shoot super fast.
And then sometimes one of the kids inadvertently responds to it in some way.
Yeah, that's the weirdest ones.
Yeah.
But so I've wondered, well, maybe it's a little bit of everything. Maybe it is this sort of plasma or magnetic or electromagnetic or whatever the things that I saw back in the day, those orbs. Or maybe they're like fairies.
Yeah, or maybe because inherently humans have to put a label on stuff. Maybe it is all the same thing. Maybe we're all describing the same thing. You know, some people, and again, I don't ever want to offend anybody, but I'm just saying that, like, one way that people can explain some sort of spiritual visitation, whether it's an angel or whatever, is like, oh, I think there's like a fairy floating around in the forest. And it's like, well, maybe that's just like the light that's, you know what I mean?
Right.
All that stuff can kind of, it's interesting that time after time after time after time, so many of these things are somehow linked.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that blows my mind. You know,
the one thing that I don't agree with, and I mean, for you folks that have like listened to my story and you went to this sort of explanation, I'm not like bashing you for it, but I think a lot of times, you know, somebody like me, if I were to like, I mean, granted, I'm coming out on a podcast that who knows how many people will hear, but like, I feel like it's when people do that and then somebody jumps directly to, oh, well, it's 100% UFO related or like extraterrestrial, you know, drones, or it's like, to me, that's where it's sort of like, I think the magic is in just being able to admit that, like, hey, this has happened a lot of times. I have no idea what this is. Like, and even to this day, I still have no idea.
Yeah, it could very possibly be all of or one of the above.
Yeah,
you know?
Right.
I mean, dude, I also found, have you seen this Da Vinci painting of Jesus with the orb?
No.
I'll send it to you, man. It's this old painting that Da Vinci did, and it's just Jesus like standing there, and in one of his hands, he's got this like clear sort of orb or whatever, and nobody really knows why, what it's supposed to represent, that kind of stuff, you know. And you can go back, and there's all kinds of old accounts and things that you can find about people throughout history all around the world that have experienced something like this, the orbs, or something like the ball lightning and or the foxfire or the swamp gas, that kind of stuff.
Well, and also I think it's important to say that, like, you know, like...
Wait, hold on just a second. I said that just to say, like, this isn't a new phenomenon. In other words, it's not just dust particles in a camera lens.
Right.
Okay.
And that perfectly goes into what I'm about to say with, you know, this idea, you know, I feel like we bring up like the fae and fairies a lot, but something for like folks that may not know is like this whole idea, or like the Cottingley fairies, we'll cover that case eventually, but like this idea that they're just these like little tiny miniature things and they have wings, like that's a fairly new sort of
depiction,
visual version of that. Like that's never been, like, you know, when you talk about like when people talk about,
like my mind immediately goes to Hook, and I'm just like, oh man,
what's
her name? Julia Roberts.
Yeah. But the thing is like back in the day, like you know, when people were legitimately scared of like fairy abductions and will-o'-the-wisps, like they were seeing light phenomenon exactly like what I'm talking about. So I don't think I think that, you know, whatever they were associating as fairies, maybe that's the same thing that we're still seeing, but it just feels like, you know, it comes across as like being silly because everything's been like so, you know, ran through the Disney machine, and you know, it's like, oh, well, you're just talking, there's no such thing as like Tinkerbells flying around. It's like, well, we're not saying that. We're saying, I think whatever these things are, which maybe they are linked to geomagnetism, maybe they are linked to whatever, but they are these sentient, you know, light phenomenon that nobody can explain.
Man, super fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean,
I agree, man. Man, I feel like just a weight's been lifted. I've been wanting to tell this.
I should have just started making like a chart of how many times and how many episodes you kind of like reference your orb story. Like,
I know.
And we're going to do an episode about it one of these days. And so many of them. And finally, it's here. And I mean,
it's here.
Thank you guys for listening, because I know we were going to dive into it in the last episode, but, you know, some went around the electricity. Some got a little crazy. I don't know.
Well, if you want to find us, you can head on over to Instagram. We got some cool new merch in our link tree. I think you can shoot directly to our store, actually, in our bio. Some cool Camp Rad Strangeness 2022 gear, go grab some of that. Buy us a coffee if you want. Anything to help support the show. Make sure you tell a friend. Just tell one single friend or anybody that you think would be into this kind of stuff. It really helps spread the word, get the word out, and get new ears on our podcast. If you want to leave us a message, feel free to drop it in our DMs or jump into the conversations that we have in our comment sections. If it's more long form or you want to leave us a voice memo, shoot on over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear it. We got anything else, Woody?
I think that's it, man.
All right, go buy a shirt. We love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes.
clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Man, it feels good to have finally been able to talk about it. Hey, honestly, dude, I would absolutely love to set up like a camping trip, basically in the loft, just to see if we could see anything.
Yeah,
I mean, it could be awesome. Man.
Scary, but yeah, I'd do it.
I'm telling you, like
just live stream on Instagram,
dude. I'm dead serious, man.
24-hour live stream.
Because here's the thing, like people have like the Meadow Project and like Skinwalker Ranch. Like, dude, it was so consistent there for a while that like.
Well, it's just weird, dude. You had like the Lady in White experience.
Yeah, right.
You've had, I mean, just in that area too, it's just kind of like especially like if you're facing, let's just say you're at the back window, not the one that faces like the driveway, but the other one.
Right.
That sort of like horse pasture and stuff.
Little
like
meadow.
That meadow.
It's magical, dude. It's weird.
And it's magical, but it's also just kind of like, I always say that, yeah, dude, there's something out there, man.
Yeah, I agree. I agree too.
But you know, like,
it is funny because that was when I talked to Timothy Renner, after I told him this stuff, like the first thing that he said was, do you have a lot of quartz in the area? And I was like, I mean, yeah, like pretty much the whole thing is quartz. Those are the rocks that I had to pick up in the pasture down in the front every weekend that my stepdad made me. And then he said,
mowing or something.
Well, like, so we like down where,
Don't give me a long story, man.
No, I'm not. But you know how like in front of the house, there's that big flat space. It used to be all trees.
Yeah.
Before Rick like cut all that, like clear cut it. And so there were like tons of like rocks and stuff where he like graded all that. So I used to have to do all that. So it's all like quartz. And then he said, well, were you anywhere near like natural springs or like creeks or anything? And furthermore, like, are you close to anywhere where two streams like cross?
Man, we got to get him on the show, man.
That's like literally right behind the loft.
Okay, my friend.